sermon, another time getting in the Word. Let's jump into it. Just starting off here, though. Last week we did parables of Jesus, and I decided since there are so many of them, we would give another sermon attention to a couple more parables of Christ, and I think it's important. I think there's never a point where we can't go back through and learn something else or learn something new. And tonight we're just gonna go through. And you may have heard these many times. You may have grew up in church, or maybe you never did. But this is gonna be just another refresher or a first time. So the first one we're gonna go through is the parable of the sower, and that's gonna be in Matthew 13. Matthew 13, 1 through 23. That's where we're gonna be, 1 through 23. So if you do have your Bibles, great. Go with me there. Let's be there together. It's awesome to be in the Word at the same time as somebody else, so we can go in there and we can kind of devour God's Word together. So Matthew 13, 1 through 23. Let's kind of, we're going to read it in sections, so I don't just kind of grow through the whole thing and then we'll talk about it. I'm going to do it in sections. So here we go. That same day Jesus went out of the house and sat beside the sea, and great crowds gathered around him, so that he got into a boat and sat down. The whole crowd stood on the beach, and he told them many things in parables, saying, A sower went out to sow, and as he sowed, some seeds fell along the path, and the birds came and devoured them. Other seeds fell on rocky ground, where they did not have much soil, and immediately they sprang up, since they had no depth of soil. Immediately they sprang up, but they had no depth of soil. But when the sun rose, they were scorched, and since they had no root, they withered away. Other seed fell along the thorns, and the thorns grew up and choked them. Other seeds fell on the good soil, produced a grain, some 100-fold, some 60, and some 30. He who has ears to hear. So, here we are. This is the initial parable without any explanation. And imagine hearing this for the first time. There's no extra verses afterwards to help you explain what's going on here. There's none of that. What we can take from this is we can take that there are 4 different types of soils, and that's going to be the most important thing. 4 different things. These are 4 different things that are happening, and each of them have something different that happens to them. They're not all the same. The seed is the same, but the soil is different. And that's going to be important. That the seed is, notice there's not 4 different seeds. It's not a little apple, a little orange, a little peach, a little plum. It's none of those things. It is, the seed is the same, but the soil is different. How you doing, Christian Gamer? Good to have you. So, here we are, again, where we have the soil being different. So let's go on. I just wanted to make that point briefly, that the seed is the same, but where the seed lands is different. Verse 10, Then the disciples came and said to him, Why do you speak to them in parables? And he answered them, To you it has been given to know the secrets of the kingdom of heaven, but to them it has not been given. For to the one who has, more will be given, and he will have an abundance. But from the one who has not, even what he has will be taken away. This is why I speak to them in parables. Because seeing they do not see, and hearing they do not hear, nor do they understand. Indeed, in their case, the prophecy of Isaiah is fulfilled, that says, You will indeed hear, but never understand. You will indeed see, but never perceive. For this people's heart has grown dull, and with their ears they can barely hear, and their eyes they have been closed. It sounds like police and sirens are going right outside the window, so please forgive me for all the noise if you can also hear that. Lest they should see with their eyes and hear with their ears and understand with their hearts and turn, and I would heal them. But blessed are your eyes, for they see, and your ears, for they hear. For truly I say to you, many prophets and righteous people longed to see what you see and did not see it, and to hear what you hear and did not hear it. Okay, So in this next section, we just have the disciples saying, why don't you speak plainly? Why don't you speak plainly to them as you do to us? And Jesus makes a distinction. You are different from them. I chose you. I didn't choose them. I didn't pick them, handpick them for the ministry. I chose you. So I'm going to equip you with the tools needed to carry out your ministry. And so here we are where the Lord does not reveal everything to everyone at the same time. So again, we have the sovereignty of Christ here in this small area right here where he says, no, they're going to have ears to hear and eyes to see, but they're not going to get it. And I'm not going to tell them instantly. And part of that was so they would mill it over. You can't continually spoon feed people. And we do that a lot here in America. We just spoon feed the parable and the answer. There you go. And so we keep people kind of spiritually weak because they didn't have to go away and go, I don't really know what that meant. Do you know what that meant? Let's talk about that. 4 soils, 4 seeds, and this and that. And there's no pondering. There's no any of those things. So let's continue on. Verse 18 says, hear then the parable of the sower. And I'm assuming at this point, because there's been no break in the text, that he is continually speaking to his disciples. This is a continuation of Jesus talking to his disciples that we are now privy to because of Matthew's accounting of this. Hear then the parable of the sower. When anyone hears the word of the kingdom and does not understand it, the evil one comes and snatches it away, what has been sown in their heart. This is what was sown along the path. So here we are right up front. What is the division between getting it and not getting it? Well, the first 2 verses have it right there. Understanding. They do not understand it. They don't get it. They don't understand why the gospel of Jesus Christ is good news. Their hearts are hard, their eyes are dull, their ears are blunted. They don't understand why it's good. And so in their ignorance, the devil takes that opportunity to snatch it away. He takes it away. He doesn't allow them to mill it over because their ignorance keeps it at bay. If you remain ignorant, you will always keep salvation at bay. So that's the first soil. It's hard. You can look at that along the path. Notice a path has been constantly treaded down by feet, right? If you ever go into the woods and you're along a path, the dirt has been smashed, 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 smashed. It's all been slammed down. So it's highly compacted. It's hard for anything to grow there unless somebody comes along and kind of churns up the soil and breaks it up, because it's almost like concrete. I mean, it's so hard. So if you cast seeds along a compacted earth ground, they're not going to go anywhere. And so they're going to be easy prey for the birds to come, which is the devil. So if your heart is hard, then it's not going to be easy for that seed to take root in your heart and blossom into something that's worthy unto the king. And so the devil takes that opportunity to then snatch it away before you have any time to cultivate it. So here we are. Verse 20. As for that was sown on rocky ground, this is the one who hears the word and immediately receives it with joy. Yet he has no root in himself. He has no root in himself, but endures for a while. And when tribulation or persecution arises on account of the word, immediately he falls away. Now, this is very important. Notice we're not on the path, we're on rocky ground, okay? And if you've ever seen something sprout forth out of concrete, maybe you saw a crack in the sidewalk, and here's this plant just sticking up out of the concrete. It's hanging out. You're like, wow, look at what can even grow in concrete. And it's kind of a neat thing to see. But if you ever grab it, if you've ever grabbed one of those plants and pulled, it takes no effort to just pull it right out because there's not much there for it to grab onto. It's a little bit of dirt, a little bit of soil. You can even see some of these plants grow in people's gutters that neglect their homes. You can see it there too. And they're very shallow. There's no big root system. There's none of those things. And so here we are. They immediately receive it with joy. Oh, it's great. I love that. Salvation in Jesus, eternal life. They love it. It's exciting for the one that is preaching to them because it seems like they're getting it. You're like, yes, that's it. That's it. But the problem with this person is they didn't count the cost. They didn't count the cost of what it meant to follow Jesus and what ultimately it wasn't always going to be good times. It wasn't always going to be immediate joy and a flash in the pan and I sprouted up and I was there. I was in the church. I was a part of it. And it says right there, yet has no root and endures for a while. So they're there for a while. They endure it. There's not a lot going on, which we have here in America. This one really can speak to our culture of we have none. There is no persecution. There is no tribulation for Christians here. Not yet. I believe it someday it will come, but there's none of that. And so we don't know. We don't know who the ones that were falling on the rocky ground. And what it shows, these are things that show the true believer, right? The path, the rocks, the weeds, the good soil. And we're going to get to that as we go on. But they endure for a little while, but when these things arise, they immediately fall away. No hesitation. Oh, wait, say what? Christians are going where? To prison or to death? I'm out. I'm done with that. I didn't know that it was all going to be this. I was good when it was in the good times. I was fantastic. This was awesome. Get my best life now. Get my best life then. Good to go. I'm happy with that. And then the time of testing comes, the time of tribulation, the time that would test a person's faith. And if you haven't been rooted in the word, if you haven't been rooted in prayer, if you're not with it and in it and going to continue on, you know, we talked about the virgins with the oil, you're going to be found lacking. When that time comes, you're not going to stand. And Paul talks so often about once you stand, endure, persevere. And so we have to understand. So there's the second one. Now let's move on. As for the one that was sown among the thorns, this one who hears the word, but the cares of the world and deceitfulness of riches choke the word, and it proves unfruitful. So this is a different type of soil here. This is one, and this would, again, John 15, the vine, being a productive member of the church, producing fruit again. I've been hammered online talking about works-based salvation. I never preach about works-based salvation. What I do preach is that works are necessary. If you are going to be claimed to be saved and a Christian, there ought to be works. There ought to be fruit. Jesus even says you'll know them by their fruit. So there has to be a production of something. A good tree bears good fruit. A bad tree bears bad fruit. There's a production of something. So this one's interesting, though, because it says that he hears the word. So the word was received. He heard it. It didn't say he didn't have understanding. It didn't say he was, he immediately left. He wasn't scorched. Scorching is death, right? The devil taking the seed, that's death. So these first two have to do with death. The third one's worse, though. The third one is probably the worst, because this one is growing. This one has not withered. It's a plant. It's growing among the weeds. And the weeds here are the deceitfulness of riches and the cares of the world. So these are a lot of Christians today. They are this third soil. They are the Look at me. I go to church. I have the bumper stickers. I do the thing, but you're essentially a fruitless plant. I agree with you. I agree with you. You have to understand, you have to ask yourself, if persecution were to come, and depending on the type that comes, we always think drug out into the streets and shot or something. I believe it'll be more clinical. It'll be, you don't get a 401k. You have to pay more taxes. You lose your property. We can take your house. Stuff like that. We are a first world nation, and so it would. I'm not saying it couldn't happen, but we could see a level of persecution where it's bloody. I wouldn't say that wouldn't happen at all. We can, if we lose at the power grid, you'll see people turn into savages. So we have to understand that persecution is right around the corner at any moment in history. But the third one here, these are people that on that day would say, Lord, Lord, didn't I, and didn't I, and didn't I? But you have been kept unfruitful. The cares of wealth, oh man, and the cares of this world, you prioritize the world and money over Christ. And if you do that, you will be a plant that has no fruit. And when the gardener comes around looking at all the plants that are in the garden that he planted, and he says, what's up with this one? It's taking up the soil, it's here. It's in the garden, but it never produces any fruit. It never gives me anything back. It never does anything. Tear it up. Why should it take up that soil? Why should it stay there and not produce anything for the master? You have to understand, we're servants. It's our job to produce for the master. It's not to say that that's where we hold our salvation, but that's where we are proved, right? Prove that you are a Christian. How do you do that? A lot of people are very arrogant in their belief that they're a Christian. I don't have to do any of that. I'm saved by faith and faith alone, faith through grace. Yes, you are. You are saved by faith alone, through grace alone, by Christ alone. All of those things are true. But you can't say all those things and then be the laziest, idlest, unproductive element of the kingdom and think, A, you'll make it, or B, you will not be a poverty-stricken poor person in heaven. And a lot of people will say, I just want to get in. I just want to get in. I don't want to go to hell. I'll be a janitor. I'll sweep the floors. Just want to be there. What kind of thought process is that? And when people say that, what they mean is, I'd love to drink in as much of the world as I can and do all of the world stuff and then have heaven. And that's a dangerous game to play. I'm not going to sit in judgment. I'm just going to say that's very dangerous if you choose to play that game, because the Lord has every right to do whatever he wants with you. We do not hold God's arm behind his back until he says uncle. We submit. We don't demand. So, okay. Anyway, so there's the three. And now we have this as for the sown on the good soil. This is the one that hears the word and understands it. He indeed bears fruit and yields, in one case 100-fold, in another case 60, in one 30. So in the fourth one, you have three different levels of productivity. So there's two things here that are important. He not only hears it, which is a receiving of it, but he understands it, which is a production of it. There's your two in and out. I heard it, and I understood it, and I've pushed it back out to produce. And so we have here 100-fold, 60-fold, and 30-fold. Not all of us will prioritize the gospel of Christ. We will do it on different levels with different gifts, some of us more than others. And there, right here, is another distinction of greatest in heaven and least in heaven. It's talked about all the time. There are different elements in heaven. We will not all be the same. Will not all be the same. Some of us are going to have a lot more rewards than others, and some of us are going to be very poor because we did not care about God's kingdom on earth. All we cared about was just not going to hell. And not going to hell is icing on the cake for the Christian that is continuing the work of the gospel. You don't got to be a preacher. You don't got to be a pastor. You don't even have to work for a church. You just have to go proclaim and baptize and teach. Any one of us can do that. I'm not a pastor. I don't run a church. I'm just a regular guy. There's nothing special about me other than the fact that I've submitted my life to Jesus Christ and he's given me this gift, and so I give it to you. I give it back. And so here, understand this. Out of the 4 soils, there's only one that make it. Only one. So how many people are going to be in heaven? A fourth. That's what this parable would say, a fourth. Now there are differences in, the broad road, the narrow road, but according to this parable, a fourth is the only one that makes it. The other 3 do not. Snatched, fried, or choked. Death, robbing, and stealing. What does it say the devil comes to do? Steal, kill, and destroy, right? So he stole the seed, he destroyed the plant, and he killed the production. That's the 3. So the 1/4, the last one, is the only one that made it. He's the only one that's in heaven. He's the only one that has shown himself approved. That's my question to all of you out there. Are you showing yourself approved? Because if you're not, what are you doing? Are you putting your trust in your own words? Are you not looking at the Holy Scriptures and going, how do I live this out? What about the Bible? Do I need to live out day in and day out? And my answer to that would be yes. All of it. As much of it as you can. The words of Christ, the law, all of it. Try to live. Now, when I say the law, I don't want people to get me misunderstood. I mean the moral law, not the ceremonial or the dietary, but the moral. Thou shalt not kill, steal, covet, all of that law. So when people say all the law is negated, did you guys miss the part where it talks about inappropriate sexual behavior? Do we just say, oh yeah, we can do that now? No. Come on now. Come on now. So that is the first one I wanted to talk about, and I hope that was clear. 3 didn't go, 1 went. And the 1 went, he bore fruit. And it says right there, he indeed bears fruit and yields. That's important. To bear it is to have it to be grow and full. To yield it is to have it come to, what am I looking for? Proper ripeness, to where it's like, okay, that's pickable. I'm throwing that in the basket. I see some fruit. They're not quite there yet, but they're there. I'm hoping they reach their full potential so then I can pick them and put them in the basket. And that's what we're looking for. We're looking for not only to bear fruit, but to yield fruit in season. Being ready in season, out of season. I'm sure you all know that. So let's go on to the next. I'm doing 2 parables tonight. The next one is in Matthew 18, 21 through 35. So Matthew 18, 21 through 35. And this is the parable of the unforgiving servant. And this one parable's probably not talked about that much. It's a very good one to talk about because it's relevant. It's very, very relevant, this parable. So let's dive in. All right. Then Peter came up and said to him, Lord, how often will my brother sin against me and I forgive him? As many as 7 times? Jesus said to him, I did not say to you 7 times, but 77 times. Therefore, I want to stop right there. Essentially, the Lord is not telling you to keep track. If numbers, this is a deeper scenario, but numbers in the Bible should never be counted, but always be weighed. And 7 is a profound number. It's used a lot. It's a perfect number. And 77 times is a doubling down on a perfect forgiveness, right? And so when you look at this, what he's saying is stop keeping track. That's a great question. Do you think YouTube videos is making fruit? everybody's got to do whatever they can. And this isn't all that I do. I guess it would depend on what your YouTube videos are. Are they proclaiming the gospel? Are they, explaining people the scriptures? You have to look at it as just because you put Christian in the title does not mean it's Christian. So that needs to be understood. If you're going to make YouTube videos and say, I'm doing this for the Lord, that's very important, and you need to understand the levity of that. You need to understand the weightiness of that, because if you say I'm doing this for the Lord, but then it's all about some hobby you like or something that you enjoy, but you say, I'm doing this for the Lord, that's kind of a dangerous place to be, because you're claiming you're doing it for him, but really you're doing it for you, and that can cause the Lord to become jealous, and we don't ever want to do that. I don't only do this, I do other things, but I think if you're going to make YouTube videos in his name, proclaiming and reading the scriptures and explaining it to people, sure, why not? Why can't that be bearing fruit? Now, unfortunately, I can't physically be with all of you. I can't physically, sit down and talk to you one-on-one as I'd love to do, but that's just not how the online community works. So I hope that answered your question. So this whole passage is going to be about forgiveness. And so in verse 23, it says, "Therefore the kingdom of heaven may be compared to a king who wished to settle accounts with his servants. When he began to settle, one was brought to him who owed him 10,000 talents." Now, it's just to make a reference here. A talent is 10 years of wages, okay? I'm sorry, 20 years. 20 years of wages. Almost like, for some of us, a lifetime of working, right? This man owed 10,000 of that. So there's no way in this man's lifetime he was ever going to be able to pay this level back. It's too much. It's too great. He could have 2 or 3 people working in his name to try to get this money, and he would never do it. It's just too much. That's a surmountable amount of money. So that's the point. It's more than you could ever pay back in a lifetime. So keep that in mind. And since he could not pay, his master ordered him to be sold with his wife and children and all that he had, and payment to be made. So essentially, the master calls him out and demands payment any form necessary. Your life, your children's life, your wife's life, and all your property is all mine now. So the servant fell on his knees, imploring him, have patience with me, and I will pay you everything. Out of pity for him, the master of that servant released him and forgave him the debt. Now that's incredible. So here we have a man who has more debt than he could ever pay back in probably 5 lifetimes. If he literally worked every single day for 5 lifetimes, he couldn't pay that money back. It's too much. It's far too much, and that's the point of this. So he begs the master. The master has compassion, pity, care, kindness for this servant, and says, you know what? Your debt is absolved, and you're free to go. What a compassionate, loving thing to do, to just absolve somebody's debt like that. That's incredible. So let's go out and see if the servant learned anything. But when the same servant went out, he found one of his fellow servants who owed him 100 denarii. So a denarii is, let me make sure I get it right here, a day's wage. 1 day, and that man owed him 100 days. 100 days of wages. That is something that is actually obtainable to pay back. That's able to be done. That's almost a quarter of a year. That's a little more than a quarter of a year that this man would have to work to pay that off. Very doable. That's a very doable debt to pay back, right? And it says, and seizing him, he began to choke him, saying, pay what you owe. Now, we see a grave difference here. When the first one fell on his knees, the master had compassion. When this one, he doesn't even get a chance to say, oh no. He goes, finds a servant that owes him money, snatches him up and is choking him and saying, pay me my money. So you can see how aggressive he is with the money. He loves the money. And so out of his love for the money, he became in a massive debt. And now, because he's loved the money so much and he's debt free, now he can go and do whatever he wants with his freedom, right? He's free. And he's chosen to use his freedom to hold back forgiveness and compassion. This man has a new lease on life. He's a free man. He's indebted to nothing. He has had a massive weight lifted off his shoulders, and the first thing he does is he goes and uses his freedom to do something wicked. What a heinous thing to do. A heinous thing. And it said, so his fellow servant fell down and pleaded with him. Same posture here. Same posture. Have patience with me, and I will repay you. Says the same thing the first servant says. He refused and went and put him in prison until he should pay the debt. So he acted the opposite of the master. He treated him poorly, wickedly, sinfully to do something like this. Not a forgiving person. Now, this is important. I want you to hear this. When his fellow servants saw what had taken place, they were greatly distressed, and they went and reported to their master all that had taken place. Somebody's always watching. Understand that. Someone is always watching. Some other person, some other Christian, an angel, a demon, somebody is watching you at all times. And in this part, this man wasn't going to get away with it because he did something wicked. And these servants had seen how this man was just let off. He was just given a free pass, freedom on life. He was given life, him and his family. So they went back and told the master all that had taken place. Then his master summoned him. Well, now you got to pay the piper. And he said, you wicked servant, I forgive you all the debt because you pleaded with me. And should you not have had mercy on your fellow servant as I had mercy on you? And in anger, his master delivered him to the jailers until he should pay all his debt. Now, in other translations, it says to the torturers or the tormentors as a form of saying, like, you're not going to be able to pay your debt in prison, but you will pay with torment. We'll get that money. You've ever heard that phrase? I'm going to get my money one way or another. It's going to be in physical money, or it's going to be in time, or it's going to be in your tears or your blood. Some way I'm getting that money. And so verse 35 is the hinge pin. So also my Father in heaven will do to every one of you, every one of you. Who's he talking to? Who's he talking to? Well, let's go back. Peter came to him. So he's talking to the 12. Every one of you and me. If you do not forgive your brother from your heart. Notice something in here. The master was angry, and he compares him to the Father. When the Father sees you being forgiven of all your sins, you were forgiven of all your sins. The Lord Jesus shed his blood to give you freedom and life. And you used that and you received it and you submitted to it. And then you used that freedom and life to go do wickedness and not give forgiveness of all things. Of all things, you chose not to give forgiveness. You didn't murder. You didn't beat anybody. You didn't lie or steal. You just chose to harden your heart. You chose to not forgive. You just said, no, that's one of those unforgivable offenses. That's a big error to do that. That's a big fat one. Because in another place in Matthew, it says, if you do not forgive your brother, you will not be forgiven. You have to be forgiven. So if we've received this life, this freedom, this forgiveness, shouldn't we also do the same? And who cares what the offense is? No offense is as grievous as our sin is to the Father. Our filthy, disgusting rags is our sin before the Father. As in Zechariah, it talks about the filthy clothes that Joshua wears in front of the throne. So are we, draped in our filth, stand before a holy God in our sin. No, we need to be forgiven of that sin. We need to have new clothes put on, and to have those new clothes, and to be washed free, and to have the blood poured upon us so that we can be stand in front of the Lord justified. You have to forgive. We have to. And it's not for the other person. It's for us. Forgiveness is for the one that is doing the forgiving. It's freeing you from this prison that bitterness and spite are the bars. And grudge is the door. And you will put yourself in your own prison. Most of the time, when people don't forgive, they are harboring such hatred and such bitterness. And half the time, the other person doesn't even know the offense has been taking place. They don't even know. They're not even aware of it. And the other person is just grinding away in their hatred. We've been given a way out of this. Swallow your pride and forgive. And then you will be able to freely receive the forgiveness from the Father. It's a necessity. Oftentimes, we don't even like to see other people forgiven. We deem that unjust. Like the prodigal son, the older brother. I cannot believe you forgave that wretched younger brother of mine after all he did. We often don't even like to see other people forgiven. We have to be better. We have to be better. So, if you're going to take something from tonight, I want you to take produce fruit, yield fruit, bear fruit, and forgive. Forgive one another. It's not that deep. I don't care what happened. Murder, rape, theft, slandering, gossip. Forgive them. Forgive them. It should have been us on that cross. It should have been us with that crown of thorns. It should have been us that our side was pierced. He took our place. Forgive and let it go. Right? Jonah's a great example of that. Jonah was very bitter and upset. Had to spend 3 nights essentially in the depth inside of a beast to finally get it across, and then he still was upset. Don't be like Jonah. The Lord has compassion on whom he has compassion. It's not your job to be judge, jury, and executioner. It's our job to forgive freely because we want continual forgiveness ourselves. I hope that's been clear. I hope that's been helpful. I hope you guys will go forward in a forgiving heart. I tell you what, not to forgive somebody is like a cancer. It's something that eats away in your heart. It changes you. You harbor these things, and it changes your character. It changes your personality. You will become a hard, bitter, angry, resentful person. Don't fall there. Don't go there. Be encouraged. Don't hold off on forgiveness. Forgive that person. Forgive your mother. Forgive your father. Forgive your siblings. Forgive your boss. Forgive your coworkers. Forgive that random person on the street that cut you off. Forgive them. That is one way that we can show people how Christians are different. Are you a Christian? Are you a Christian? Are you truly a follower of Christ? Then prove it by how you forgive and how you bear fruit and how you yield fruit. Prove it. Prove you're a Christian. James says very clearly, not in word alone, but in action and in truth. Indeed, prove you're a Christian. Show yourself approved. Stop being lazy. Some of you guys out there are lazy Christians. You could care less the work of Christ as long as you get to do whatever you want to do. Stop being so lazy. Start doing the work. And look, you don't have to start by flying through the Bible in a year. That does you no good. Choose a book and sit in that book for months. Sit in it. That is so helpful. All this flying over. You know what I call that? When somebody says, oh man, I read the Bible in a year. I read it. I did it. I read the Bible in a year. You know what I view that as? Flyover states. You ever been in a plane? You're flying over Kansas, Idaho, Oklahoma. and you're looking down, you're like, man, I flew over them. That's what you did with the Bible. You just flew over it. Oh, yeah, huh? Ezekiel, Isaiah, yep, Jeremiah, Ecclesiastes, yep, been there, done that. And it's like, well, what'd you learn? Oh, I don't know. There was some weird stuff in there, and it was strange, but I don't know. Yeah, because you didn't slow down. Slow down. There's no need for you to fire through this thing like you're on fire with gasoline. You don't need to do that. Verse by verse. And if you're looking for the context of a verse, you're trying to see the context of the verse, here's a little tip. There's only a couple of you here. I'm going to give it to you. Here's a tip. Go 3 verses up and 3 verses down, and it will help you find the context of that verse. It will help you understand who's it to, what's it for, how it's to be used. 3 up and 3 down. I hope that's been helpful. Guys, I love being here with you. I love doing this. If you guys have any questions, now would be the time. I'll give it a couple minutes for anybody that has any questions, and we can kind of get into anything that anybody wants to talk about. But if not, I'm going to go ahead and close for tonight. But I'll give it a little bit of time if anybody has any questions. I come across some of these live feeds, and like the person's just like sitting there staring at the screen, and I'm always like, that's so strange. I don't understand. And they have like hundreds of people watching them. So that's not going to be tonight. I'm not going to sit here and just stare at the screen. So it doesn't look like anybody has any questions right now that I see, unless somebody is just typing furiously a book. So I think we're going to close. Guys, I ask the Lord bless you and keep you, and that his face shine upon you. Be productive, be forgiving, be loving, be Christ-like. I'll see you guys next week. I love you all.